Hello everyone, and thank you for choosing to spend your evening here with me. If you enjoy these stories, I'd truly appreciate your subscription, like, and comment. It only takes a second for you, but it means the world to me and helps make each video even better. Now, get comfortable and let's begin. Imagine waking up without an alarm. There is no phone vibrating on the nightstand, no traffic noise filtering through the window, no schedule to check, no emails waiting for you, and no meetings to prepare for. Instead, you open your eyes to the soft grey light of dawn seeping into a rock shelter. The air is cool and fresh, smelling of wood smoke and earth. Nearby, you hear the quiet murmur of voices as other members of your group begin to stir. For a moment, an infant cries and then falls silent. Someone laughs. Outside, in the gathering light, birds call to one another. This is how humans woke up for hundreds of thousands of years. This was morning. The time is 40,000 years ago. Give or take a few millennia. You are a Homo sapiens living somewhere in what we would now call Europe, Africa, or Asia. Anatomically, you are identical to modern humans. The same brain volume, the same body structure, the same capacity for language, thought, and emotion. But your world, your daily reality, is so foreign to ours that it is almost impossible to imagine. And here is the question that endlessly fascinates archaeologists and anthropologists. What did you actually do all day? You see, an image from countless films and documentaries is burned into our memory. Cavemen crude and hairy, constantly running from saber-toothed tigers, spending every waking minute in a desperate search for food, always on the brink of starvation, living short, brutal, and miserable lives for the sake of pure survival. That is the picture, right? Prehistoric life is one continuous nightmare of deprivation and terror. Except that it is almost entirely wrong. Archaeological data tells a radically different story. Ancient people didn't just survive, they lived. They had a rich social life, leisure, art, music, spirituality, and humor. They told stories by campfires. They decorated their bodies. They carved intricate figurines and painted breathtaking images on cave walls. They cared for their elderly and disabled. They buried their dead with ceremonies and grave goods. They had a culture complex and sophisticated that we are only beginning to understand. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before talking about cave painting and ritual burials, we need to understand the basics. What did a typical day actually look like? How did our ancestors spend their time when there was no job to commute to, no bills to pay, and no grocery stores? When survival meant something completely different than it does today. The truth will surprise you. Ancient people likely worked less than you do. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, which provide our best insights into the prehistoric lifestyle, show that people typically spent only 4 to 6 hours a day on what we would call subsistence activities: gathering food, hunting, preparing meals, and maintaining tools and dwellings. That was it. The rest of the time was taken up by leisure, socializing, playing, creating art, telling stories, or simply doing nothing. This goes against everything we have been told about progress. We imagine our ancestors as desperately poor in time and resources, while we ourselves are rich and live in comfort. But in terms of free time, it might be exactly the opposite. A prehistoric person likely had more hours of leisure in a week than most modern people have in a month. If you are watching this to fall asleep, that is exactly why I make these videos. Perhaps you should subscribe and write where you are right now and what time it is. I always check the comments, and it's fascinating. Someone in Tokyo at dawn, someone in London at lunch, someone in California at midnight, and everyone is falling asleep to the same stories of our shared human past. The more we study prehistoric life, the more complex and multifaceted the picture becomes. Yes, there were dangers. Injuries were common and often serious. Infant mortality was high. Infections that we treat with antibiotics today could be fatal. Life expectancy was lower than it is today, though not as low as you might think. If you survived childhood, you had a decent chance of living to 50 or 60. Some individuals lived much longer. But here is what is truly important. Within those years, people lived full lives. They laughed, loved, grieved, created, struggled, and celebrated. They were not just biological machines optimized for survival. They were humans in the full sense of the word. We understand this word. They had the same fundamental needs as we do. Food and shelter, yes, but also connection, meaning, beauty, and play. So, let's live one day together. Not some dramatic day with a mammoth hunt or a clash with a hostile group, though such things did happen. Just an ordinary day. A regular day 40,000 years ago, when an ancient human woke up at dawn and lived their life in a way that seems completely alien to us, yet strangely familiar. Because understanding how our ancestors actually spent their time doesn't just teach us about the past. It raises uncomfortable questions about the present, about how we live now, about what we gained with civilization and what we might have lost, and about whether progress always means what we intend it to mean. Let's start from the very beginning. From the moment the grey light penetrates the rock shelter and another prehistoric day begins. Awakening. Dawn in the Paleolithic world. You do not wake up to an alarm. Alarms do not exist. There is no concept of being late, no schedule to follow, no boss waiting. Instead, consciousness returns slowly, naturally, drawn by the gradual lightening of the sky and the stirring of bodies around you. The first thing you notice is the cold, not the bone-chilling, life-threatening frost of deep winter, but that bracing morning chill that makes you reluctant to leave the warmth of your sleeping place. You are lying on a bed of dry grass and animal skins, huddled closely with other members of your community, not necessarily for intimacy, but simply for survival. Body heat is a resource too precious to waste. The second thing you notice is the smell. Wood smoke. Always wood smoke, but now it is faint. The fire that burned brightly last night has turned to embers. Mixed with this is the scent of unwashed bodies. Not that it's unpleasant, just human. The smell of rendered animal fat from yesterday's meal. The earthy, mineral scent of the rock shelter itself. If you are near the coast, perhaps it smells of salt air. If you are deep inland, in the spring, the green scent of new growth. Someone is already awake. There is always someone who is not sleeping. Sleep in the Paleolithic was not like modern sleep. We have evidence both from studies of modern hunter-gatherers and from sleep research that people likely practiced what scientists call biphasic or polyphasic sleep. You slept for a few hours after dark and then woke up for a while in the middle of the night. This wasn't insomnia. It was normal. During this period of wakefulness, people spoke quietly, maintained the fire, looked after children, perhaps made love, or simply lay there thinking about whatever people think about when the world is silent and dark. This meant that, at any point during the night, someone was usually awake. Someone was listening for sounds that didn't fit the silence. The footfall of a predator, the snap of a branch, a distant howl meaning danger was prowling the territory. Safety was not something taken for granted. It was maintained hour after hour through vigilance and cooperation. The person who is awake now adds wood to the fire. You hear the soft sounds of movement. You see a sudden brightening as the flames catch the new fuel. Mastering fire was perhaps the most important skill of your people. Let it go out completely, and you would have to start it anew either by carrying embers from another group's fire, perhaps miles away, or by using friction methods that were exhausting and time-consuming. Better to maintain it. Better to ensure that someone always takes responsibility for feeding it through the night. Exactly who performed this job varied. Sometimes it was the elders, who slept lightly anyway, and had already proven their value to the group in 1,000 other ways. Sometimes it was the young adults, especially those without small children, requiring a parent's full attention. Sometimes the duties were shared in turns and informal agreement, that everyone contributes to the survival of the whole. As the fire grows, the rest begin to stir. First, the children. Usually, children wake up ready to move, ready to play, just like they do now. You hear a thin voice, the rustling of bodies, The soft murmur of a mother telling her child to stay close, stay warm, wait for the sun. Children are terrible at waiting. Within minutes, some of the older ones are already on their feet, stretching, moving toward the fire, their breath visible in the cold air. The adults wake more slowly. There is no hurry. This is important to understand. The very concept of hurry, bustle, and lack of time are modern inventions. Your day is governed by light, hunger, weather, and the seasons. The sun is only just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of grey and pink. You have hours before you need to do anything specific. Right now, the most important thing is to transition from sleep to wakefulness in a way that doesn't waste the precious calories needed for whatever the day brings. People stretch slowly, methodically, loosening stiff muscles after sleeping on the ground. They yawn, scratch, and attend to basic physiological needs. If you are in a rock shelter or cave, there is likely a designated area for waste, far enough away to avoid contamination but close enough to be safe. If you are in a temporary camp, people simply step a short distance into the surrounding vegetation. Someone, likely one of the more experienced members of the group, steps outside the sleeping area to check the surroundings, not with paranoia, but with caution. What changed overnight? Are there tracks near the camp that weren't there yesterday? What about the weather? Does that gathering of clouds in the west promise rain? Or will it just pass by? Is the wind shifting, bringing different scents, different information about what is happening in the wider world? This morning assessment is critically important. Paleolithic people knew how to read signs in a way we can hardly imagine. From the behavior of birds, they could determine if a predator was nearby. They could predict a change in weather several days in advance by observing clouds, feeling the humidity, and noticing how plants reacted to atmospheric changes. They could identify individual animals by their tracks and tell how long ago they passed, whether they were healthy or injured, and whether they were traveling alone or as part of a herd. All of this information is processed and, importantly, shared with others. As more people wake up and gather around the roaring fire, conversation begins initially quiet, then growing as the group consciousness activates. Dreams may be discussed. The Paleolithic mind likely did not draw hard boundaries between dreaming and waking reality. A vivid dream could be interpreted as a message, a warning, or a visit from ancestors, something worthy of discussion and reflection. Plans begin to form, but only in broad strokes. The group needs food, but that is always true. The question is what kind of food and where to find it. Someone might have noticed yesterday that certain berry bushes are almost ripe. Someone else might have seen tracks of a large animal moving through a particular valley. A third might suggest checking fishing spots if you are near water. None of these suggestions are orders. No one is in charge in the sense that we understand leadership. Decisions are born out of discussion, consensus, and the fact that people choose to follow those who possess the necessary experience. But that is still to come. For now, in these early morning moments, the main activity is simply being together. The community, your extended family, your survival squad reunites after the nighttime separation. Everyone has survived another period of vulnerability. Everyone is present. Everyone is accounted for, ready for a new day. There is comfort in this. In numbers there is strength. That is true. But there is also something deeper, something that explains why humans are fundamentally social. We literally evolved to need each other. Those who felt satisfied in groups, who drew comfort from proximity to kin, who enjoyed cooperating, they were the ones who passed through the bottleneck of evolution. Their descendants thus carry the genes that make isolation feel wrong, and community feel like a necessity. Children are playing now. Their energy is infectious. They aren't playing anything structured. No rules. They just run, chase, and wrestle, physical play that develops strength and coordination. The adults watch with half an eye, letting the children be children, but ready to intervene if the play becomes too rough, or someone wanders too far. Meanwhile, practical matters are addressed. Someone checks tools from yesterday. Is the spearhead seated firmly in the shaft? Has the carrying basket developed weak spots that need repair? Are there enough cords for today's needs? Or does someone need to spend time making more? These are not chores in the modern sense. They are not unpleasant tasks to be finished before doing what one wants. They are simply part of life, as natural as breathing. And all of this, absolutely all of it, happens without any sense of time pressure. The sun is higher now, the morning chill is beginning to recede. You have been awake for perhaps an hour, though you have no way to measure it and no reason to worry about it. Your stomach begins to remind you of itself. Others likely feel the same. Soon, attention will shift to food, but not yet. For now, you are warm. You are safe. You are surrounded by people who know you and care for your survival, because your survival increases their own chances. This is what awakening looks like in the Paleolithic. No sudden jolt into consciousness. No race to get ready. Only a slow, communal transition from sleep to activity, guided by light, bodies, and the ancient rhythms that governed human life for hundreds of thousands of years. This pattern is so fundamental that we still carry its biological echo within us. The desire to hit the snooze button, to wake up slowly, to enter the day gradually rather than attacking it, that isn't laziness. It is your Paleolithic brain remembering how mornings worked in the times when we had all the time in the world, and the only important schedule was the movement of the sun across the sky. Let's talk about breakfast. Except your ancestors 40,000 years ago didn't have breakfast. At least, not in the way you imagine it. Morning meal. Food in prehistoric times. They didn't wake up at 7 a.m., trudge to the kitchen, and pour themselves a bowl of cereal. They had no fixed meal times at all. Or rather, they ate when food was available, when hunger demanded it, and when the opportunity arose. This might sound chaotic, but it wasn't. It was perfectly adapted to their reality. Imagine waking up in that rock shelter as the first light penetrates the entrance. Your stomach growls. You are hungry, so you eat. It is that simple. What you eat depends entirely on what is available. Perhaps there is leftover meat from 2 days ago, when the hunters brought down a red deer. It has been hanging in the cool depths of the shelter, away from direct sunlight, wrapped in its own skin. The cold autumn air has kept it from spoiling, though it has already begun to develop a slightly gamey smell. This means it's best to finish it today. You tear off a strip and chew slowly. It is tough, requiring real work from your jaws, but it is protein and fat, exactly what your body needs after a night's sleep. Your teeth are strong, your jaw muscles powerful. Dental analysis of Paleolithic skulls shows striking wear evidence of a life spent processing tough foods. But here is the surprising thing. Those same teeth show something else. Microscopic plant remains, starch grains from roots and tubers, phytoliths from seeds and nuts. Your ancestors didn't just eat meat. They ate everything. Next to the meat stands a wooden bowl. Actually, it's just a piece of bark, folded and sealed with pine resin, filled with hazelnuts gathered 3 days ago. You crack a few using your back molars. This technique has been passed down through generations. Children observe adults doing this from infancy, learning the exact angle and pressure needed to crack the shell without crushing the kernel inside. Next to the nuts lies a leather pouch of dried berries, blackberries, gathered during the late summer abundance and dried in the sun. Now they are shriveled, concentrated sweetness, and you eat a handful. The sugar enters your system immediately, providing a quick burst of energy. But the real treasure is the basket of roots by the fire. Someone, likely one of the older women who possesses decades of plant knowledge, dug them up yesterday by the riverbank. These are cattail roots, starchy and nutritious, but practically inedible in their raw state. So they were placed near the fire, not in the fire itself, but close enough for the heat to slowly break down the tough fibers and turn complex starches into digestible sugars. This is cooking, but not as you know it. No recipes, no precise temperatures, no timers, only the knowledge accumulated over thousands of generations about what heat does to different foods. The roots lay there all night, slowly roasting in the residual heat of the fire, which never quite goes out. By morning, They are soft enough to eat and sweet enough to enjoy. You pull one out, careful not to burn your fingers. It is hot but tolerable. You peel away the outer layer and bite into the flesh. By modern standards, it is no delicacy, but it is filling and, more importantly, safe. Raw, these roots contain toxins that would cause severe stomach pain. Cooked, they are perfectly edible. This transformation, turning plants into food using fire, became perhaps one of the most important technological breakthroughs in human history. It effectively doubled or tripled the number of plant species your ancestors could eat. Tubers that were toxic when raw became staple foods when roasted. Seeds that would have passed through the digestive system unchanged became valuable nutrition. After grinding and heating, evidence of this incredible dietary diversity comes from many sources. Coprolites fossilized feces have been found at archaeological sites across Europe and Africa. When scientists analyze them under a microscope, they find a striking variety of plant remains. Seeds from dozens of different species, flower pollen, microscopic fragments of leaves, roots, and bark. Some coprolites show traces of insects, grasshoppers, beetle larvae, termites. To a modern Western palate, this might seem unappetizing, but they are actually an excellent source of protein and fat. Many modern hunter-gatherer societies consider insects a delicacy, and there is no reason to think your ancestors thought otherwise. Calculus, the hardened plaque that builds up on teeth, tells a similar story. When archaeologists scrape it from Paleolithic skulls and examine it under powerful microscopes, they find plant starches from across the entire spectrum: wild grains, root vegetables, nuts, berries, even plant fibers that were likely chewed to extract moisture or soften them for other purposes. From all these pieces of evidence, a picture of incredible dietary flexibility emerges. Your ancestors were not narrow specialists. They were opportunists, capable of exploiting almost any food source in their environment. Coastal groups ate fish, shellfish, seaweed, marine birds, and mammals, supplementing this with whatever plants grew near the shore. Inland forest dwellers ate deer, wild boar, nuts, berries, roots, and mushrooms. Groups living by rivers ate fish, waterfowl, aquatic plants, and land animals that came to the water to drink. This flexibility was crucial for survival. Environments change, seasons shift, and animal migrations follow unpredictable routes. A group that could only eat one or two types of food would have died of hunger when those resources became scarce. But a group that could eat 50 different things always found something. As you consume your morning meal, the others are doing the same. A young mother shares nuts with her toddler, showing him how to crack them and how to pick out the kernel without catching shards of shell. He isn't very good at it yet. His small hands lack strength and coordination, but he is learning. And in a few years, he will be teaching his own younger siblings. An old woman is preparing something more complex. She has taken some of the remaining meat and is grinding it between two stones, mixing it with rendered fat and dried berries. She's making pemmican, though she doesn't call it that. It is simply food that keeps for a long time, concentrated nutrition that can be taken on long journeys or set aside for lean times. This is knowledge, technical and precise. The proportion of meat, fat, and berries must be correct, otherwise, it will all spoil. The grinding must be thorough, otherwise, the mass won't stick together. She learned this from her mother, who learned it from hers, a chain of knowledge transmission, stretching back thousands of generations. No one eats alone. This almost never happens. Eating is a social act. It is shared and distributed according to complex rules that everyone understands without words. The hunter who made a lucky shot yesterday does not eat more than the others. In fact, he may even eat less, because that is how the system works. If you killed an animal, you share it with the group, and when someone else brings down a beast, they will share it with you. This is insurance, risk distribution, the social glue that holds the group together. Children run back and forth, snatching bits from different adults they are playfully shooed away, or have food placed in their hands. No one is stingy with the children. There is always enough food for everyone, and if not, the adults eat less to feed the younger ones. The meal is not formal or ceremonial. People eat standing, sitting, walking around, checking tools, talking and laughing, but at the same time, it performs vital social functions. Together, they strengthen bonds, exchange information, and make plans for the day. Who will go gathering plants today? Who will go hunting? Who will stay to process the deer hide? These decisions are made organically, born of consensus rather than orders. Someone mentions that the hazel trees by the northern grove should have a good harvest now. Several women and older children volunteer to check. Someone else notes that there were deer tracks by the river yesterday. The hunters exchange looks and nod, beginning to mentally prepare for a possible pursuit. Cooking continues during this conversation. Hands are always busy. Someone is grinding seeds between stones. Someone else is sorting through dried herbs, discarding those showing signs of mold. A teenager is learning to use a sharp flint flake to slice meat into thin strips for drying. These skills are vital, and they are mastered exclusively through observation and practice. No written recipes, no formal schooling. Children watch the adults, try to imitate them, receive corrections, and try again. By the time they become adults themselves, they possess encyclopedic knowledge about food, which plants are edible and when, how to recognize them in different seasons, where to find them, how to process them, and how to store them. This volume of knowledge is staggering. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherers show that they typically possess detailed information about 200,300 species of plants. They know which parts are edible, which require processing, which are medicinal, which are toxic, and which are useful for other purposes, such as making rope or arrow poison. Your ancestors almost certainly possess similar knowledge. They had to. Their survival depended on it. Eat the wrong mushroom, and you are dead. Fail to properly prepare certain roots, and you will spend the next 3 days with grueling cramps. This is not superficial knowledge. This is life or death information, carefully preserved and passed down from generation to generation. As the morning meal draws to a close, a few more branches are tossed into the fire. The embers never go out completely if someone is looking after them. Fire is too precious, too difficult to start from scratch. It is better to keep it alive, feeding it regularly and sheltering it from rain and wind. Someone is always responsible for maintaining the fire usually. People take turns. The meal was not exquisite, but it was sufficient. Everyone ate something. Bellies are moderately full. Energy levels will last for whatever the day brings, and that is really the only thing that matters. Your ancestors were not gourmets, but they understood the principles of nutrition deeply and intuitively. They knew that variety was important, that different foods brought different benefits, and that balance over days and weeks was more important than the perfection of every single meal. They ate to live, but they also lived to eat. Food was a pleasure, even when it was simple. The satisfaction of a perfectly cracked nut, the sweetness of ripe berries, the rich fattiness of bone marrow roasted over the fire. These were not just calories. These were experiences, shared moments, a connection to the landscape and to one another. And now, with the morning finally here and stomachs full, it is time to set to work. The main business of the day begins. Gathering. The foundation of prehistoric survival here is what no one tells you. When it comes to prehistoric life, all the glory goes to hunting. Dramatic battles with mammoths, coordinated deer harvests, dangerous encounters with predators. This is what captures our imagination, what ends up in museums and documentaries. But here is the truth that would be obvious to anyone who actually lived 40,000 years ago. Hunting was the exception. Gathering was the rule. On any given day, 60% to 80% of your calories came from plants, roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, berries, leaves, and flowers. The percentage varied depending on the season and location. Groups living by the coast might get more protein from shellfish. Communities in northern regions might rely more heavily on meat during long winters. But for most human populations, in most cases, plants were what kept you alive. And it wasn't that our ancestors particularly loved vegetables. It was simple evolutionary mathematics. A successful hunt could provide meat for the entire community for several days. But a hunt ended in failure more often than success. Animals are fast, unpredictable, and dangerous. They require hours of tracking, careful coordination, and a good deal of luck. Plants, on the other hand, don't run away. They are exactly where you left them last season, and they grow in predictable patterns that anyone with sufficient knowledge can learn to read. So, while the hunters were out somewhere in the hope of glory, the majority of your group was busy with the real business of survival. They scanned the surroundings with an expert eye, noticing signs invisible to the uninitiated, and gathering the food that would eventually end up in tonight's dinner. Here we need to be careful with assumptions. For decades, anthropologists told a neat story about prehistoric gender roles. Men hunted, women gathered. This was presented as something natural, inevitable, and perhaps even biologically determined. But the facts paint a more complex picture. Yes, in many prehistoric societies, women and older children performed most of the gathering work, while men specialized in hunting, but not in all societies, and not necessarily even in the majority. Archaeological finds in various locations show women buried with hunting weapons. Isotopic analysis of ancient bones shows that the diet of some women was as meat-heavy as that of any male hunter. Some groups practiced collective hunting in which everyone participated. Others had specialized gatherers of both sexes, who spent their lives perfecting their knowledge of plants. The truth is likely this. Prehistoric societies were pragmatic. They organized labor in a way that made sense in their specific circumstances. In some groups, pregnant or nursing women might focus more on gathering because it was compatible with carrying infants. In others, women of post-reproductive age might become the most valuable members of the community, specifically because they could hunt without being tied down by childbirth. The key point here is this: do not imagine gathering as something less important or less prestigious than hunting. It was expert knowledge. It required years of learning, and it sustained the life of every member of the group. So, imagine yourself on this food-gathering expedition. It is mid-morning. The sun rose several hours ago, dispelling the morning mist. You set out with 3 other people. Your mother's sister, who knows the plant-growing areas better than anyone in the group, a younger cousin, about 11 years old, who is learning about roots, and your own 3-year-old child, strapped to your back in a sling made of carefully softened deer hide. You aren't just wandering at random. You are following a mental map created by years of observation. In the oak grove 3 miles to the north, the acorns should already be ready for harvest. The patch of wild onions by the stream has already finished flowering. But a little further on there are thickets of cattails where you can dig up starchy roots. If you are lucky, you might find a bee's hive with honey. If you are very lucky, bird eggs. The walk itself is no easy promenade. Today you will walk between 5 and 10 miles. Much of the route lies across terrain that would challenge modern hikers. Rocky slopes, thick undergrowth, fording streams, steep climbs. You do all this while carrying a child and the tools of your trade. A digging stick hardened by fire and polished to a shine from long use, several nested baskets, woven from plant fibers, a leather bag for small finds. Perhaps a stone knife is tucked into a belt made of twisted fibers. But here is what makes gathering so different from hunting. There is no adrenaline or drama. Here, concentration of attention is what matters. You read the landscape like a book, noticing details invisible to a stranger. A subtle change in soil color indicating tubers growing underground. The pattern of animal tracks hinting at a fruit tree nearby. A specific angle of sunlight suggesting which side of the hill the berries will be the ripest. Your aunt stops on a patch of ground that seems unremarkable. She sees what you are only just learning to recognize: a specific type of grass that always grows near edible roots. She drives the digging stick into the ground, carefully probing the soil. At a depth of 3 inches, she hits something hard. She rotates the stick, loosening the earth, then reaches in and pulls out a tuber the size of a fist. It is pale, gnarled, and looks completely unappetizing. But you know from experience that when it is roasted in the embers of tonight's fire, it will be sweet and filling. She hands it to you. You carefully place it in the basket. She digs again. Another tuber. And another. This spot is a rich harvest. In 10 minutes, you have gathered enough tubers to feed everyone tonight. And perhaps there will be some left for tomorrow. But you aren't finished yet. Your aunt knows these plants by heart. But more importantly, she knows their stories. Stories are how you remember knowledge. She tells your young cousin about how her grandmother became very ill after eating a root that looked almost exactly like this one, but had slightly different leaves. She points out the distinction. 3 veins on the leaf instead of 5. That tiny difference means that the other plant would have killed you, stopping your breathing within a few hours. This is education. But it is nothing like sitting in a classroom. This is knowledge for survival, passed down through stories, demonstrated on actual plants, and reinforced by years of observation. Your cousin will absorb hundreds of such lessons. By the time she's your age, she will recognize about 300 different species of plants depending on the season and location. She will know which ones are edible, which are medicinal, and which kill. She will know when to gather each of them, how to prepare them, and what they are useful for. Modern botanists spend years in universities to learn how to identify plants. Your ancestors learned it out of necessity, starting from early childhood, because a mistake could mean death. The group moves on. You wade across a shallow stream, the cold water stinging your feet. On the other side, your aunt notices something that makes her smile. Mushrooms growing on a fallen log. She approaches carefully, examines them from different angles, and even smells them. Mushrooms are tricky. Some are nutritious and delicious. Others cause severe poisoning, and some kill. She picks 3 and leaves the rest. She is certain about these, but caution is always wise. Hours pass in this rhythm, walking, observing, gathering. The child on your back has fallen asleep, lulled by the steady movement. The baskets become heavier and heavier. Wild grapes, still a bit tart but edible. Grass seeds that you will grind into flour upon returning to camp. The bark of a certain tree which, when boiled, produces a tea that brings down a fever. Your aunt gathers the bark carefully, never taking so much that it would harm the tree. She learned long ago that you must think about the next season, the next year, and the generations that will come after you. This is sustainable resource management though. Your ancestors had no name for it. They simply knew. If you strip a plant bare, it won't be here next time you need it. Groups that learned this lesson survived. Those that didn't faced hunger when resources ran out. By the middle of the day, you are miles from camp. Your legs are tired, your shoulders ache from the weight of the baskets. But there is something almost meditative in this work. No hurry, no pressure. Only the steady rhythm of walking and gathering. The warmth of the sun, and the sounds of birds in the forest canopy overhead. You are fully present in the moment in a way that modern people very rarely experience. All senses are engaged. You listen for the rustle of animals, look for the shimmer of water indicating a stream ahead, and inhale the air for the scent of smoke, which could mean another group has made camp nearby. Your younger cousin asks a question. She has noticed a plant with bright red berries and wants to know if they can be eaten. Your aunt doesn't just answer. She walks over, examines the plant, and launches into another story about how her mother found these berries during a harsh winter when other food was scarce. How they kept the group alive during 3 days of a blizzard. About how one must be careful because birds eat them without harm. But humans must cook them first. Otherwise they will cause stomach cramps. The transmission of knowledge continues. Every plant is a lesson. Every place is a memory. For your people, this landscape is not just territory. It is a library. Every tree, every stone, every stream carries information accumulated by generations. Your ancestors wrote nothing down, but they were far from ignorant. They were keepers of deep ecological knowledge that could rival any data collected by a modern scientist. Finally, toward evening, the group turns back to camp. Your baskets are now full. They are heavy with food that will feed your entire community tonight. In total, you have walked about 8 miles. Your feet hurt. Your back aches. The child has woken up and is fussy, demanding food. But you are satisfied. This is good work. Important work. The kind of work that keeps everyone alive. When you return to camp, there will be no fanfare. No one will celebrate your return the way they celebrate a successful hunt. But everyone knows the reality. The hunters may return today with empty hands. They often return that way. But you have brought food, reliable, nutritious, life-sustaining food. And tomorrow, you will go out and do it again. This is the rhythm that sustained humanity for hundreds of thousands of years. Not dramatic moments, but steady, patient, knowledge-intensive gathering labor. Your ancestors read the landscape in a way we have almost entirely forgotten. They paid an attention to nature that most modern people never experience, and they did it not as a hobby or spiritual practice, but as fundamental labor for the sake of survival. Hunting, strategy, patience, and rare glory. Something might surprise you. Your ancestor probably didn't hunt today, or yesterday, or maybe even this week. We have formed an image of prehistoric life as a constant struggle. Early humans waking up every morning and immediately setting off to chase mammoths, or fight saber-toothed cats. Hollywood loves this plot. Man against beast, daily death matches for survival. But the reality was far more interesting and much more strategic. Hunting for ancient people was not a daily routine. It was a rare, high-stakes event that required immense planning, patience, and, more often than not, ended in failure. A successful hunt might happen once every few days if you were lucky, once every few weeks if you weren't. All the rest of the time you were preparing, planning, tracking and, most importantly, relying on gathering to fill your stomach. But when a hunt did happen, it was something extraordinary. Let's say today is just such a day. The signs had been accumulating for some time. Yesterday, scouts noticed fresh tracks of a small herd of antelope moving through a valley about 5 miles from camp. The animals are heading toward a seasonal water source, following paths your people have observed for generations. The timing is right, the weather is clear, and most importantly, several experienced hunters are on hand and healthy enough to make the attempt. That is how it begins. Not with a sudden impulse, but with careful deliberation. The group assembles early in the morning. 6 men and 2 women, all proven trackers and hunters. They discuss the plan, using a combination of spoken language and hand signals honed over thousands of years. Who will take which position? Where are the animals likely to go? What are the fallback options if something goes wrong? They have spears with them, each a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering that took days to create. The wooden shaft was carefully straightened over fire and seasoned for months to prevent warping. The stone tip was carved from high-quality flint traded from a quarry 200 miles away. The tip is secured with plant resin and sinew, processed and dried to create a bond stronger than most modern glues. Some hunters also carry atlatl spear throwers that use the principle of leverage to triple the speed and range of a spear throw. This technology is relatively new, only a few thousand years old in your region, but it is revolutionizing hunting just as the bow will revolutionize it thousands of years later. The group sets out, and you notice something immediately. They are not rushing. There is no frantic chase, no dramatic sprint across the savannah. Instead, they walk with a steady, measured pace, reading the landscape as they go. This is where hunting turns into science. One of the trackers kneels before a depression in the sandy soil. He studies it for several long moments, then signals to the others. The track is fresh, likely from this morning. The depth and clarity tell him the animal was walking, not in a panic. The distance between tracks indicates it is a young individual, healthy, a good size, but not too large to be difficult to bring down. He can determine all this from a single hoofprint. It isn't magic. It is pattern recognition honed by a lifetime of observation. Your people have tracked animals since childhood, learning to read the landscape like you read a book. Every broken twig, every shifted pebble, every scratch on a rock tells part of the story. Where the animals went, how fast they were moving, how long ago they passed, whether they were calm or alarmed. The group follows the trail for hours. No rush, just persistent walking, occasional stops to check signs and adjust strategy. This is the part of the hunt that never makes it into dramatic retellings. The long, patient tracking that requires more mental endurance than physical strength. Around noon, they spot the herd. 8 antelope were grazing in a shallow valley by the watering hole. A critical moment of decision arrives. Try an ambush, attempting to get within spear-throwing range, or use a technique that humans, alone among all predators, have perfected. They choose persistence hunting. This is what makes humans terrifying predators. We cannot outrun almost any animal in a sprint. A healthy antelope can reach speeds of 50 miles per hour. A human manages about 15 at most. But we have something no other animal has. We can run 4 hours in the height of the midday heat and not overheat. This is thanks to our almost hairless bodies and incredible capacity for sweating. Most animals, covered in fur and lacking effective cooling systems, are forced to stop and rest after intense exertion. Otherwise they will literally cook from the inside out. The hunters spread out and begin to jog toward the herd. Not a sprint, but a steady, even run. The antelope notice them instantly and bolt. Seconds later, they have vanished over the ridge. But the humans do not stop. They follow the tracks at the same steady pace, reading the signs, maintaining the pressure. An hour passes, then 2. The sun is merciless, the kind of heat that would cause most predators to collapse on the spot. But the humans keep moving. Their bodies are built for exactly this kind of endurance. They are sweating profusely, yes, but that is the whole point. Every drop of moisture evaporating from their skin carries away heat that would otherwise accumulate and paralyze their muscles. They find the herd again. The antelope run, but now they show signs of stress. Their tongues are hanging out. They are breathing heavily. They cannot cool down fast enough. The chase continues. 3 hours, 4. The trackers switch lead positions, allowing individual participants to drop back and recover slightly, while others maintain the pressure. This is cooperative hunting at its best. No single human could do this alone, but a coordinated group, constantly communicating and sharing the effort, can accomplish what seems impossible. Finally, after nearly 5 hours, they overtake a single antelope that has strayed from the herd. The animal stumbles, its cooling system overloaded, its muscles beginning to fail from the combination of heat and exhaustion. One hunter gets close enough for a spear throw. The weapon flies true, striking behind the shoulder blade, and moments later, it is all over. The hunters stand around the fallen animal, not yet shouting or celebrating. First comes the practical work. One of them makes a quick, precise incision and utters a prayer or words of recognition. We cannot know the exact words or gestures, but evidence from many prehistoric sites suggests that early humans performed a kind of ritual over successful prey, respect for the animal that gave its life, gratitude to the spirits or forces that, in their belief, govern the hunt. Then begins the butchery, which in itself is a highly complex technical operation. These hunters know animal anatomy better than most modern surgeons know human anatomy. Every muscle group, every organ, every useful part. They work quickly and efficiently. The hide is removed whole. It is valuable for clothing and shelter. The best cuts of meat are separated for immediate consumption and for carrying back to camp. Organs that spoil quickly are prepared to be eaten on the spot. Nothing goes to waste. Even the bones will eventually be cracked for marrow, one of the most nutrient-rich foods available. But there is a problem. They are 5 miles from camp and have just obtained several hundred pounds of meat and materials. They cannot carry it all at once. And if the meat is left unattended, lions, hyenas, and vultures will take it within hours. Here, the social dimension of hunting becomes decisive. Two runners set off at speed to the camp for reinforcements. The rest remain with the kill, building a fire to keep scavengers at a distance and starting the process of smoking some of the meat for preservation. A few hours later, other people arrive from the camp. Elders, children old enough to help carry, and nursing mothers who have left their infants with relatives. Everyone participates in the harvest. The journey back to camp is a celebration. A successful hunt happens rarely enough to be a community event. Tonight there will be feasting, storytelling by the fire, and likely dancing and music. The hunters will recount the chase in detail, and in this telling, it will become part of the community's collective memory. Another story that will teach the youth strategy, perseverance, and cooperation. But let us be clear about one thing. This does not happen every day, or even every week. Between successful hunts are dozens of failed attempts, tracks that lead nowhere, animals that prove too fast or alert, injuries that force hunters to turn back, hunts that simply don't work out, despite everyone doing everything right. And this is the key to understanding prehistoric life. Hunting was important. Undoubtedly, it provided concentrated protein and fat that gathering alone could not match. The social bonds formed during a collective hunt helped strengthen group cohesion. The required skills tracking, weapon making, strategic planning pushed the development of human intelligence and communication. But hunting was never the primary source of calories for most prehistoric groups. That honor belonged to gathering, which happened every day, provided the bulk of nutrition, and did not require risking life and limb. Hunting was fleeting glory, a stake in a high-risk game that sometimes paid off spectacularly. The success of early humans lay not in the fact that they were the best hunters, but that they were good enough at hunting, while being excellent at everything else: gathering, tool-making, social cooperation, and adapting to new environments. They were generalists who could apply specialized skills when necessary. And the hunt, when crowned with success, was just one thread in the complex tapestry of prehistoric survival. Tomorrow, regardless of whether today's hunt was successful, roots will still need to be dug, nuts gathered, tools repaired, children taught, and the endless, patient work of sustaining life performed in a world that was beautiful, abundant, and at times ready to reward the clever, persistent, and cooperative. The antelope is gone, transformed into food, clothing, and tools, but the knowledge of how it was obtained lives on, passing from this generation to the next, being honed and improved with every retelling until it becomes not just a survival strategy, but a culture. By midday, the camp came alive with a sound that would be instantly recognizable to any craftsman throughout history. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of stone against stone, not loud, not frantic, but persistent and purposeful. The sound of someone creating something that did not exist before. Your aunt sat on a flat stone by the central fire with a hammerstone in one hand and a piece of flint in the other. Every few seconds, she struck the flint at a precisely calculated angle, sending a small flake spiraling into the dust. Around her was a scatter of rejected pieces and failed attempts, archaeological refuse, that would remain visible even 40,000 years later, telling stories to people who have learned to read stone. This was not occasional work, it was daily maintenance, as necessary as eating or sleeping, because tools were not eternal. A spearhead used yesterday might have chipped upon hitting bone. A scraper someone used to process a hide last week had grown dull and nearly useless. In a world without metal, without mass production, without the ability to simply buy a replacement, you either made your tools yourself or you didn't survive. But here is what is remarkable. Making stone tools, what archaeologists call knapping, was not something that could be mastered in a single evening. It was a skill that took years to perfect, requiring an understanding of the properties of stone that bordered on intimate knowledge. Different rocks fractured differently. Flint was predictable. Obsidian was sharp but brittle. Chert was reliable but more difficult to process. One had to know where to find good stone, how to test it, and how to recognize quality before investing hours of labor. Watch your aunt work, and you will see a mastery that took a lifetime to acquire. She didn't just hit stones against each other randomly. She read the stone, seeing lines of potential fracture invisible to inexperienced eyes. Every strike was calculated. Too hard, and the blank would shatter. Too weak, and nothing would happen. The angle had to be exact. The point of impact chosen unerringly. This was geometry and physics performed purely through intuition and muscle memory. This process was called the prepared core technique, and it represented centuries of accumulated knowledge. Your aunt had been shaping this piece of flint for the last hour, carefully removing flakes to create a core of exactly the shape and angle needed. Now she was ready for the result. One perfect strike, and a long, thin blade detaches from the base, sharp enough to cut through hide or meat with minimal pressure. She examined it critically, running her thumb along the edge, and nodded. Good enough, but the work was not finished. The blade needed a half-dan attachment to a handle that would make it truly useful. Here, craft turned into art. Earlier, she had prepared a wooden handle of hardwood with a notch carved into one end. Now she pulled out a small leather pouch containing pine resin she had collected, and heated until it was tacky, mixing it with a bit of charcoal and crushed bone for strength. This was to be the prehistoric equivalent of superglue. Watching her work, you would notice something fascinating. She didn't need to think about most of the steps. Her hands moved automatically, performing processes she had done thousands of times. Heating the resin over the fire, applying it to the notch of the handle, precisely positioning the blade, unwrapping the joint with thin strips of sinew that shrink and tighten as they dry. The entire process took about 10 minutes, but it rested on decades of experience and generations of accumulated knowledge. Nearby, your brother was working on a completely different task. He had a piece of antler from that deer killed 3 days ago, and he was slowly, patiently carving a spearhead out of it. This was different from working with stone. Antler was organic, flexible, capable of withstanding impacts that would shatter stone. But it was harder to process, requiring different tools and techniques. He used a stone burin, a chisel-like tool for scraping and carving the antler. The work was tedious, accompanied by a constant soft grating sound that served as a counterpoint to your aunt's rhythmic tapping. Thin shavings of antler fell with every movement, accumulating in a small pile at his feet. From time to time, he stopped and checked the point with his thumb, monitoring the sharpness and balance. This point would be different from the stone points used by most hunters. Lighter, more flexible, it could be thrown further and was less likely to break on impact. But it took hours to make. An antler only appeared when someone successfully brought down a deer or similar animal. Stone was everywhere. Antler was a treasure. Therefore, you used it sparingly, for special purposes. And you made sure everyone in the group knew who made what. Because here is what the archaeological record has only recently revealed. Prehistoric craftsmen took pride in their work. We know this because we find tools that are more beautiful than necessity required. Stone points of perfectly symmetrical shape, even though asymmetrical ones would have worked just as well. Bow needles decorated with tiny carved patterns. Spear throwers made of antler carved in the shape of animals. No one decorates a purely functional object unless aesthetics matter to them, unless they want their work to be recognizable and admired. Your brother's spearhead will be effective, yes, but it will also be beautiful, because when you carried it, when you used it to feed your family, you wanted everyone to know who made it. Status, reputation, identity, all of this was transmitted through craftsmanship. At the other end of the camp, 3 women were toiling away at an equally vital task, the production of clothing. One was scraping a deer hide stretched over a wooden frame, using a stone scraper to remove all traces of fat and membranes from the inner surface. The sound was distinctive, a rhythmic shirk that carried across the camp. Her arms moved in measured strokes, slightly overlapping each path to ensure complete processing. This was not quick work. A single hide could take hours of scraping, and even then, the job wasn't finished. The hide had to be treated either smoked over the fire or rubbed with a mixture of brain tissue and fat, which prevented it from becoming stiff upon drying. The process of brain tanning was chemistry without laboratories, developed through centuries of trial and error. Someone, at some point, somehow figured out that the brain contains the exact compounds that preserve skin. Perhaps it was discovered by chance, perhaps through systematic experimentation. In any case, the knowledge was passed from parent to child for generations. Nearby, her sister was working with a hide that had already been tanned. She had a bone-awl pointed tool for poking holes, and she was slowly, methodically creating a garment. Pierce a hole, thread a sinew through it, pierce the necks. The stitches were crude by modern standards, but remarkably effective. This clothing would be warm, durable, and flexible. It would last for several seasons, perhaps even years, protecting the owners from a cold that could kill in a few hours. The third woman was doing something that seemed impossible for earlier humans. She was sewing with a real needle a tiny piece of bone, with a hole drilled at one end, through which the sinew was threaded. In your time, this technology was less than 20,000 years old, a recent innovation that revolutionized clothing production. With needles, one could make clothing that actually fit the figure, that could be tailored to a specific person, and that could be decorated with sewn-on beads or dyed strips of leather. She was sewing winter clothes for her daughter, fur-lined and layered, warm enough for the brutal colds that would arrive in a few months. The little girl sat nearby, watching closely, occasionally trying to help. This was how knowledge was passed on, not through formal schooling, but through constant observation and imitation. By the age of 10, the girl would be able to handle basic hide processing. By 20, she could become one of the most skilled leatherworkers in the group. But it wasn't just clothes and tools being made. An elderly man sat apart, working on something smaller and more fragile. He had a collection of shells that he had traded for last summer, when a neighboring group visited from the coast, which was a 3-week journey away. Now he was drilling tiny holes in them with a stone drill, a painstaking process that required steady hands and endless patience. These would become beads, strung on a cord of plant fibers for necklaces or bracelets. Purely decorative, purely social. No one needed jewelry to survive. But humans have been making them for at least 100,000 years, and likely longer, because survival was not enough. We needed beauty, status markers, and ways to express identity and belonging. These beads said, I have connections to the coast, I have the time to create beautiful things, and I value aesthetics. All of this was communicated through pierced shells on a string. What is striking about all this activity is the specialization. Not everyone was good at everything. Your aunt had spent decades mastering stonework and was a true expert in it. Your brother excelled at carving antler and bone, but was only mediocre at knapping stone. The woman sewing winter clothes was the best leatherworker in the group, and when her skills were required, others brought food or helped with other chores in return. This was not yet a market economy, but something close to it, a recognition that different people have different talents, and that the group benefits when people specialize. This was also the foundation for what would become increasingly important social complexity. In groups where everyone could do everything equally well, there was not much reason for hierarchy or status distinction. But as people developed specialized skills that others needed, power dynamics shifted. The best toolmaker, the best leatherworker, the best artist, they all gained influence that went beyond mere physical strength or hunting ability, and everywhere, the children watched. A boy of about 8 sat next to your aunt, trying to replicate her movements with his own small stones. Most of his attempts ended in failure, producing nothing useful, but she encouraged him anyway. Occasionally she would take his hand, guide his strikes, and show him the correct angle. This was education, prehistoric style. No schools, no formal programs, just constant observation and practice under the guidance of experts. By the age of 15, the boy could passably make basic tools. By 25, if he had talent and dedication, he could become experienced enough to teach others. and the knowledge would flow forward for another generation. Each one added small refinements, tiny improvements that over centuries added up to technological revolutions. As the afternoon sun moved across the sky, the sounds of craft continued. Tapping, scraping, the crackle of the fire, occasional conversation. This was how the material culture that made human life possible was created, step by step laying the foundation for everything that would come after. If you imagine early humans as exhausted, half-starved figures endlessly trudging through the landscape in a constant hunt, constant gathering, constantly on the verge of collapse, you are not alone. This image has been hammered into us for decades. Life before civilization, we are told, was nasty, brutish, and short. A constant struggle for survival. No time for anything but work. But when anthropologists began living in modern hunter-gatherer societies, and actually counting how they spent their time, a completely different picture emerged. On average, adults in many forager communities spend only about 46 hours a day on what we would call work, finding food, preparing it, caring for tools, and basic camp maintenance. The rest of the day is not filled with feverish haste. It is filled with nothing in particular. Resting, talking, playing, music, self-care, gazing into the distance, simply existing. If your day 40,000 years ago were entered into a modern timesheet, it would probably baffle a corporate manager. Yes, there are bursts of intense effort. Tracking animals for hours, carrying heavy loads of gathered food back to camp, making stone tools with meticulous precision. But these bursts are surrounded by long periods of low intensity, flexible time that you can adjust to your body's energy, the weather, and the mood of the group. So what did people actually do during all those hours? Much of it would look surprisingly familiar and strangely slow. You rest. This might mean lying on your side in the shade, listening with half an ear to the chatter of relatives. It might mean sitting by the fire, absent-mindedly turning a smooth pebble in your fingers, watching the smoke drift upward in swirling ribbons. When the body is your only real tool, its preservation is part of survival. Rest is not laziness. It is maintenance. You socialize. Conversation, in a small group of 20 or 30 people, is not optional background noise. It is the web that holds the group together. All those talks about who saw which herd of animals, who found a new patch of tubers, who argued with whom last night. This is not just idle gossip, it is a system of information exchange, a strategy for conflict management, and emotional first aid. You play with children. You let them climb on you like a living jungle gym. You show them how to throw small sticks at a target or how to handle a piece of stone carefully, so as not to get cut. Their games might seem like chaos, but through them, they rehearse adulthood, train coordination, test social boundaries, and experiment with risk and trust. For long stretches of the day, there is no urgent agenda, no tight schedule, no alarm clock dragging you from one task to another. The pace of life is often dictated by the slow cycles of the sun, the seasons, and the movements of animals, rather than a minute hand on a dial. And somewhere in this unscheduled time, something else begins to happen. People start to invent fun. Archaeologists have found small objects at prehistoric sites that do not fit into any category of tool or weapon. Tiny carved figurines of animals made of bone or antler. Smooth, worked pieces of stone drilled through the center, like early spinning tops. Small figures of people, sometimes strangely exaggerated. To a hungry adult huddled over a fire, these might offer little, but for a child, they are toys. You can imagine it. A small hand trying to spin a stone disc on the packed earth. Two children pretending to hunt with miniature spears made of twigs. A parent, half amused, half attentive, letting them help in a task that doesn't actually require help. Play is not a distraction from real life. It is real life. Through play, children learn to aim, negotiate, share, lead, and follow. There are hints of adult games too. Certain small stones and bones found together in combinations that suggest dice or tokens. Scratched lines on flat rock surfaces that could have been game boards. Places where tokens were moved back and forth in quiet contests that passed the time and strengthened social bonds. We don't know the rules they used or the stakes they played for, but the impulse is clear. When immediate needs are met, the human mind seeks patterns, challenges, and little puzzles to solve. Games are structured daydreams, and ancient people seem to have had plenty of time for them. And then there is music. In the caves of Europe, archaeologists have discovered exquisite flutes carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory, some of them over 40,000 years old. These are not crude noisemakers. Some have holes positioned so carefully that they reproduce recognizable musical scales. Someone sat and experimented, adjusting each hole little by little, learning by ear how to turn raw bone into a working instrument. Imagine for the first time someone in your group pulls out one of these flutes by the fire. The sky is dark. The stars are beginning to appear. The embers glow. The person puts the flute to their lips, takes a breath, and a strange, clear sound rises above the crackle of the fire and the soft murmur of voices. For a moment, everyone freezes. Then the notes repeat, first hesitantly, then more confidently. Someone starts clapping a rhythm. Another taps a stick against a log. Feet begin to move. Bodies sway. The camp, which just a few minutes ago was quietly settling down for the night, suddenly comes alive in dance. Music and dance are more than entertainment. They synchronize bodies and minds. When everyone moves together, breathes together, when voices rise and fall in unison, something powerful happens in the brain. Group identity is reinforced. Anxiety disappears. The world for a moment feels coherent and safe. In the small, vulnerable groups of early humans, these moments of shared rhythm could be as important as any spear or shelter. After the dancing comes the time for another great technology of leisure stories. You are by the fire again. The night is now quiet. A few final sparks drift upward like tiny glowing insects. The older members of the group move closer to the flames. Children lean against their parents. Someone, perhaps the best storyteller in the group, begins a tale. It might be about the last big hunt, when the wind suddenly shifted and almost ruined everything. It might be about the time the river flooded and the group had to move camp in a hurry. It might be about a trickster animal who steals fire, or a spirit who lives in the storm clouds and punishes the greedy. Some of these stories are clearly about real events. Others drift into the world of myth and imagination. But all of them carry something. A warning, a wise strategy, a memory of who did what and why it was important. Without writing, without records, stories are the group's memory. They carry information across years and generations. Where the good water is during the dry season, which plants can cure a fever, and which can kill what happened last time someone broke a certain social rule. Listening to these legends by the light of the campfire, half asleep, half oblivious, you are not just being entertained. You are being quietly and gently taught for the rest of your life. But not all of this time is spent on talking, music, or games. Part of it is dedicated to the slow, careful work of self-care. If you have ever watched primates in documentaries, you have seen this. Monkeys diligently parting each other's fur, picking out dirt and parasites, inspecting the skin with absolute concentration. It looks fussy, but it serves two purposes: hygiene and bond strengthening. Early humans did the same, but with a slight difference. There is no fur, but plenty of hair. You sit with your back to a friend, brother, or partner while they carefully comb through your hair with their fingers or a simple comb of bone or wood. They feel for small bumps, remove debris, and crush an unlucky louse with their fingernails. It is both practical and soothing, the kind of intimate contact that says without words, "You are important. I am paying attention to you." Then comes a dormant. Red ochre, a natural pigment rich in iron, is found at human sites dating back hundreds of thousands of years. It is often ground into a powder, mixed with fat or water, and applied to the skin or hair. Sunscreen, insect repellent, symbolic body paint. It could be all at once. You sit while someone draws lines on your face, chest, and arms. Perhaps they mark you as a member of a specific group. Perhaps they signal your role in a ritual or your status as a person who completed a dangerous hunt. Hair is braided into plaits. Beards are trimmed or decorated. Simple ornaments made of shells, teeth, or carved bone are woven into the hair or hung on cords around wrists and necks. These actions take time. They are not necessary to eat, drink, or stay alive, but they are part of how early humans turned their survival into a life with identity, beauty, and meaning. And in the gaps between all this talking, playing, decorating, and music, there are long periods of what we in the modern world have almost forgotten. How to do simple observation. You lie on your back and watch the clouds drifting across the sky. You sit quietly and follow the path of a line of ants carrying food to their nest. You stand at the edge of the camp and watch a herd of animals grazing in the distance. How they bunch up and scatter. How the wind changes their scent. You trace the patterns of the stars, noticing how certain constellations rise at specific times of the year. How the moon waxes and wanes. To a modern observer, this might look like boredom, but for ancient humans, this constant, calm observation is part of how they build a mental map of the world. It trains the attention. It sharpens the intuition. A person who has spent hundreds of evenings quietly watching the sky might be the first to notice an unusual cloud pattern hinting at an approaching storm. A child who has spent endless hours following animal tracks just for fun might become the best tracker in the group without any formal training. And there is something else here, less practical and more mysterious. When you have no glowing screens, no written words, no background music from distant speakers, the silence and stillness do not feel empty. They feel full, with the buzz of insects and the cries of birds, the sigh of the wind in the grass, the distant sound of water, the soft breathing of loved ones nearby. In this stillness, the boundary between you and the world can feel thinner. You are not a separate mind trapped in a mad schedule, looking at nature through a window on your day off. You are an animal in an environment, embedded in it, attentive to it, shaped by it. Thus, the day of a primitive person 40,000 years ago is not a blur of endless drudgery. It is a pattern of effort and rest, of focused work and leisurely ease. Hunting, gathering, crafting, yes, but also joking, singing, dancing, caring for one another, decorating, storytelling, watching the clouds and the stars. Their life was dangerous in ways ours usually isn't. Disease, injury, and hunger were always nearby, but they also had what has become a rarity in many modern lives: long, uninterrupted stretches of time in which nothing urgent had to be done. Time to let the mind wander. Time to be with others without an agenda. Time to simply be awake in a living world. And when the fire dies down and the last story fades into the warmth of the night, this vastness accompanies you into sleep. Tomorrow there will be work again, but there will also be music, laughter, and the slow, quiet business of being human. So, let's get closer to this ordinary day 40,000 years ago. Social life and community, the heart of human existence. You are not alone there in the savannah, or in the forest, or on the icy bank of a river. You live in a group, not in a village, not in a city, but in a tiny human world of 20, 30, 40 people, rarely more than 50, small enough that you know every voice, every laugh, every footstep in the dark. You can tell who is walking behind you by the way their foot shuffles on the ground. You recognize a cough in the middle of the night. This is no accident. This is exactly how your species works. Groups that are too small cannot protect themselves, cannot share enough skills, cannot find enough marriage partners. Groups that are too large become unstable. Too much conflict, too many mouths to feed, too difficult to move together when the herds leave or the seasons change. Thus, natural selection, culture, and simple practicality pushed your ancestors toward a kind of sweet spot, a society the size of a living room, intimate, flexible, deeply personal. Everyone in this small group is inscribed on a mental map in your head. Who is generous? Who is lazy? Who can be trusted with a secret? who will share food when the hunt goes poorly, who will quietly slip your child a piece of dried meat when you aren't looking. These invisible maps of relationships are as important as stone tools or fire. This is how your people survive. And where there are relationships, there are conflicts. Not courtroom dramas, not kings and judges, but everyday friction. Someone took more meat than they earned. Someone flirted with someone else's partner. Someone missed their turn to watch the fire. In such a small group, you can't just walk away and never see them again. Tonight, you have to sleep 10 feet from them. So how do you keep the peace without police, laws, or prisons? You use the oldest tools ever invented by humanity: gossip, mediation, and reputation. Gossip in your world is not idle chatter. It is law enforcement, news, and social media rolled into one. When two hunters argue about who first wounded an antelope, people notice. The story is repeated at the fire that same night, retold and embroidered with details. By the time it has gone around everyone will know who was selfish, who was generous, who apologized, and who held a grudge. No one writes anything down, but nothing is forgotten. If someone hides food, it becomes a story. Remember how he hid that marrow bone? Next time there is a food shortage, people might not be in a hurry to share with him. If someone showed bravery in a dangerous hunt or kindness to a sick old man, that too becomes a story. These stories are your social credit score. They determine who gets help in a crisis, who will be trusted with important tasks, who will be allowed to be present for serious conversations. For larger conflicts, you have no courthouse. You have elders, an old woman who has seen hundreds of disputes over meat. And marriage is a man who remembers the last time two brothers almost came to blows, and how it was settled. They are not judges in the modern sense, but they are turned to when tempers flare. They sit between the angry parties, speak slowly, and recall past events. They add context, reminding everyone of shared hardships and past good deeds. Mediation is a survival strategy. A feud in a group of 30 people can be a death sentence. Split the group in half, and suddenly each side is too small to defend itself, too weak to travel far, too vulnerable before the next harsh winter. Therefore, the entire social system is tacitly tuned toward reconciliation. People joke instead of accusing directly. They complain in roundabout ways. They sing songs hinting at bad behavior without naming names. This might sound indirect, but this gentle pressure has immense power. It allows people to change without losing face. It allows them to step back from the brink. Underneath it all lies a simple truth: your survival depends on other people. This begins early, from the moment of your birth. In your group, children do not belong to just one nuclear family in the modern sense. They belong to the camp, the group, the network of connections. Your mother is important, your father is important, but so are your grandparents, aunts and uncles, older siblings, and even unrelated adults who are effectively adopted into the family circle. In the language of modern anthropology, this is called cooperative breeding. In the language of your ancestors, it is just life. Your mother might go off to gather roots, carrying your younger brother or helping to process meat. Someone else entertains you. An aunt gives you a piece of hide to chew on. An older cousin shows you how to stack pebbles. A grandmother hums a rhythmic tune while weaving a rope, and your brain quietly absorbs the sounds of your language. The phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child," is not a metaphor here. It is a job description. If your mother dies, gets injured, or simply has to walk all day tracking a migrating herd, you do not automatically die with her. There will be other breasts to feed you, other arms to carry you, other minds invested in your survival. This redundancy where several adults care for the same children is the invisible safety net, woven into early human life. It also frees people to specialize. Some adults are better at patient teaching, others at rough play that develops balance and strength, others at comforting you when you wake from a nightmare. As a result, by the age of 10 or 12, you learn from a whole village of teachers, each passing on bits of knowledge received from their own parents and grandparents. Relationships and partnerships in this world are more diverse than a simple one man and one woman forever model. Different environments, different cultures, and different times likely saw different models. In some groups, long-term pair bonds were the norm, where partners raised children together over many seasons. In others, partnerships could be more fluid, with people forming and dissolving alliances depending on circumstances. There could be arrangements we would call polygyny today, one man bonded with several women, or polyandry, one woman at the center of an alliance of several men, especially in harsh conditions where resource distribution was critical. The key point is that there was no single natural prehistoric model of marriage. Only one thing remained constant: the need to manage jealousy, share resources, and protect children. Formal taboos, joking relationships, and unspoken rules all evolved to make this possible. Who can approach whom? Who owes whom meat or a favor? What can be joked about in public? These patterns act as quiet traffic lights, guiding everyone through the emotional labyrinth of desire, loyalty, and responsibility. And a group of 30 people is not the entire world. Beyond the circle of familiar faces at your fire, there are other groups, other bands, speaking similar languages or dialects, linked to you by distant kinship, old alliances, or simply habit. You may see them only a few times a year, but these visits are some of the most important events in your life. Imagine the end of summer or the end of the dry season, when resources in one particular valley are temporarily in abundance. Herds gather, fish run to spawn, fruit trees are heavy with fruit. Word spreads not by phones or maps, but through chains of encounters. A lone hunter passes another group and mentions where game is plentiful. A visiting relative tells of a river bend full of fish. Slowly, groups converge. This is your version of a festival. Trade flourishes at these seasonal gatherings. A man from a coastal group brings shells and dried fish. Someone from the mountains brings obsidian for blades. Others have ochre for paints, excellent hides, carved bone tools. Objects travel hundreds of miles in short leaps, passing from hand to hand again and again. Every deal is sealed with conversation, stories, perhaps a shared meal. This is also where acquaintances are made. If there are only 30 people in your group, you do not want everyone forming pairs exclusively within this tiny circle. Generation after generation. Inbreeding is a silent killer. Therefore, alliances with other groups are vital. Young people meet potential partners from outside. Someone returns to your group with a new spouse, someone else leaves, joining another group forever. In modern terms, this is population genetics. For your ancestors, it is simply life moving forward. These meetings are also a place for the distribution of information. Someone has discovered a new way to more reliably attach stone tips to a spear using plant resin. Someone has found a valley where the winter is slightly less harsh. Someone has noticed a new predator in the area. Stories, warnings, and techniques spread through these networks like radio broadcasts across a continent, but they are carried in memory and words rather than wires. All of this depends on one extraordinary adaptation: language. Not just grunts and gestures, but a multi-layered, flexible, combinatorial speech. The ability to say not just lion and there, but 3 lions came from that ravine last dry season when the river was low. So do not set up camp there with small children. The ability to explain a hunting strategy, a myth, a dream. By the period of 40,000 years ago, your ancestors almost certainly possessed languages as functional as any modern language. Different vocabulary, different rhythms, but the same basic cognitive mechanism: syntax, tenses, metaphors, jokes, insults, love songs, lullabies. Language allows your group to coordinate complex hunts. It allows the elderly to tell children about dangers they have never seen personally. It allows news of a drought in a neighboring valley to reach you before you run out of food. And at night, lying half asleep by the fire, language allows you to drift on waves of quiet storytelling. Tales of heroic animals, wise ancestors, dangerous spirits, lost lovers. In this world, the elderly are not pushed aside. They are hard drives. In a life requiring physical endurance, an old body cannot do everything it once could. Knees ache, vision clouds, hands tremble slightly when working stone. But the mind, honed by decades of experience, becomes more valuable with every year. An old man who cannot catch a deer still remembers which stars mark the change of the season. A grandmother who no longer travels far from camp remembers which plants cure stomach pains and which are deadly. An elder who has survived a brutal winter can advise when it is time to leave. Even if the sky and earth look deceptively calm, when a child's temperature spikes, the elders remember past cases and what helped. When smoke on the horizon hints at a distant fire, they remember how the forest burned last time, which animals ran where, which valley remained safe. They are walking libraries of hunger and abundance, floods and droughts, conflict and reconciliation. In a world without books, the sudden loss of an elder is like a fire in a modern library. Which brings us to the topic of death. People died young, often from infections, injuries, childbirth, hunting accidents, or simply falling from a tree. But what strikes one in the archaeological record is not the fact of death itself, but how people reacted to it. We find graves not just bodies thrown into pits, but carefully thought out burials, skeletons curled in the fetal position, sometimes sprinkled with red ochre, as if painted for a final journey. People buried with tools, beads, pieces of meat, animal teeth, ornaments. At Neanderthal sites, bodies were apparently committed to the earth in pits that were then intentionally filled, perhaps even with flowers. This speaks of something more than mere disposal. It is a hint of ritual. Perhaps your group believes the dead continue their journey elsewhere. Maybe they become animals. Maybe they watch over the living. Perhaps there are stories of a shadow world beneath the earth or above the clouds. Whatever the specific belief, one thing is clear. Death is not treated as nothing. When someone dies in your camp, the usual rhythm breaks. Foraging trips are postponed. Hunting is quieter. At night, people sit closer to one another. Words are spoken more softly. Children ask questions. Adults tell stories of the deceased's bravery, generosity, or foolish mistakes. Death also becomes part of the group's gossip, but in a different register. Not about behavior to be judged, but about meaning to be found. The very act of burying the dead, of returning them to the earth with care, does something to the living. It binds them together in shared grief, shared memory, shared fear, and shared hope. In this sense, social life and community are not just a pleasant addition to early human existence. They are the key technology that made everything else possible. Your ancestors survived not because they were the strongest individuals. They survived because they were embedded in networks of care, obligation, communication, and memory. And this small circle of 20-50 faces you know better than your own reflection. The whole of human history is already unfolding. Cooperation and conflict, love and jealousy, wisdom and folly, birth and loss. A tiny nomadic tribe carrying fire, tools, stories, and genes across the landscape. As the sun sinks lower and the day begins to cool, these bonds of community will define the final hours of your prehistoric day. How you gather by the fire, what you sing, what you remember, and what you dare to dream of tomorrow. Art and spirituality. The inner life of early humans by the time the hunting and gathering were finished, when bellies were mostly full and the fire had burned down to a steady orange glow, something else usually began. Something that did not fill the stomach or sharpen a spear, yet still seemed necessary. Your ancestors had another task besides survival. They needed to make sense of life itself. Imagine the entrance to a cave as night falls. The last light fades outside. The air cools, the sounds of insects and distant animal cries begin to swell. Inside, the fire paints moving shadows on the walls. Someone picks up a piece of red ochre. Someone else unwinds a strip of sinew with shell beads strung upon it. In the gloom, people begin to transform themselves and the world around them. To us, this looks like art and religion. To them, it was likely just life. Let's start with the most famous evidence of this in the world. Deep in the darkness, far from the cave entrance, far beyond the places where anyone needed to sleep or store food, there are paintings, not accidental scribbles at the entrance, not quick sketches one might make while waiting out the rain. Some of the most impressive Ice Age images in Europe are located hundreds of meters underground, in places impossible to reach without crawling or climbing, in places where sunlight never penetrated. Horses, bison, lions, woolly rhinoceroses, mammoths, herds flowing across the stone, as if the rock itself were alive. Carefully chosen curves of the cave walls become the powerful shoulder of a bison, the arc of an animal's ribs, the bulge of a horse's chest. Some images are shaded and layered, as if the artist wanted them to move in the flickering light of torches. This was not interior decoration. No one lived there. To create these paintings, people needed to gather torches, fuel, pigments, and tools. They needed to organize expeditions into absolute darkness. They needed to know the cave well enough not to get lost. They chose these places intentionally, and then they filled them with images that, as far as we know, only they themselves ever saw. Why? We don't know. But there are clues. One possibility is teaching. Imagine the hunters of your group leading teenagers into the cave with torches in hand, pointing at the painted herds and telling stories. Where to aim a spear, how a wounded animal behaves, in which season bison pass through a particular valley. The cave walls become a kind of three-dimensional blackboard, a school hidden underground. Another possibility is ritual. In many traditional societies, images of animals are not just pictures. They are tools for influencing reality, to summon a successful hunt before it happens, to honor the spirit of the animals on which you depend, to apologize even for taking their lives. These painted bison might have been prayers rather than paintings, or perhaps both at once. Teaching wrapped in myth, practical knowledge encoded in sacred stories. A ritual hunt painted in the dark that prepared you for the real hunt at dawn. And yet the question remains, why so deep? Why undergo the dangers of underground tunnels when a rock face, outside, would have served just as well? Some archaeologists believe these deep halls were chosen precisely because they cut you off from ordinary life. Once you were there was no day or night, no horizon, no weather, only stone, darkness, fire, voices, and what moved within your own mind. It is the perfect recipe for altered states of consciousness, which brings us to something we cannot find in fossil form, but can guess at. Early spirituality. In many hunter-gatherer cultures today, there are figures we would call shamans, people who dance, sing, fast, or use psychoactive plants to enter a trance state. They travel to other worlds, talk to ancestors, negotiate with animal spirits, heal the sick. If something similar existed tens of thousands of years ago, and evidence suggests it could have, it would make perfect sense to move these ceremonies deep underground, into the very womb of the earth. In the dark caves of Europe, archaeologists have found strange clusters of dots, lines, and geometric signs around animals. Not just realistic images, but abstract markings, ladders, zigzags, hand stencils, series of dots that may coincide with lunar cycles. Some researchers believe these signs formed an early recording system, a way of counting days, tracking seasons, or even predicting migrations. Others believe these shapes resemble patterns people see in visions, geometric flashes of light that appear before closed eyes during a trance. If true, then the walls of these caves are not just records of animals, but records of experiences within the human mind. While all this was happening underground, something else was taking place on the surface. People were decorating themselves. Long before the famous cave paintings of Europe, tens of thousands of years before them, people in Africa were grinding ochre, iron-rich minerals, into powder. They mixed it with fat or water. They rubbed it into their skin. They smeared it on tools. They used it to dye hides. At sites over 100,000 years old, archaeologists have found pieces of ochre intentionally shaped and engraved, as well as shells pierced for stringing, Small beads, worn down where they touch skin or clothing, stained with pigment, necklaces, bracelets, perhaps anklets that jingled as they walked or danced. Personal adornments might seem trivial compared to hunting mammoths, but they mark a profound shift. When you begin to decorate your body, you are sending messages without words. Color, pattern, and jewelry tell people who you are and where you belong. Married or single, healer or hunter, a member of this group and not that one. These beads and pendants might have carried stories, too. A shell from the coast on a person living far inland means trade, a journey, or the memory of a path. A tooth from a dangerous animal could be a trophy, a reminder that you faced fear and survived. Red ochre, in particular, appears again and again in burials. Bodies sprinkled with red, graves lined with pigment. Perhaps it symbolized blood, life, or the setting sun. Maybe it was meant to protect the dead on their journey, or make them visible to spirits. Whatever it meant something. By the period around 35,000 years ago, this symbolic world becomes crowded. Now it is not just beads, paint, and animal images. People begin to sculpt the human form itself. Venus figurines, small, often portable sculptures carved from bone, ivory, or stone. They share a similar style across vast distances from France to Siberia. Many have exaggerated breasts, hips, and bellies. Faces are often minimalist or absent. Arms and legs may be barely indicated. The focus is on bodies that look pregnant, fertile, abundant. What were they? Some see them as fertility amulets that women held as hope for the birth of healthy children. Others suggest they were depictions of a mother goddess, an early form of a deity embodying birth, nourishment, and the cycles of life and death. There is even a theory that some were self-portraits carved by pregnant women, looking down at their own bodies, seeing their belly, hips, and breasts, but not their face. We cannot be certain, but whatever their purpose, these figurines show something critical. Humans began to perceive themselves as symbols. Not just this is a woman, but this small object means something more. Womanhood, motherhood, life. And this symbolic thinking did not stop at bodies and animals. It extended to the sky. There are hints, only hints, that some early humans followed the stars closely. At several sites, carved bones and stones show series of notches that may correspond to moon phases or seasonal events like migrations and plant ripening. Certain animal images in caves are grouped in ways that some researchers believe coincide with constellations visible at specific times of year. These interpretations are controversial, but there is nothing surprising about them. If your survival depends on remembering when the herds move, when the salmon run, when the fruit ripens, you watch the sky. You notice patterns. Eventually, you might begin to think the sky is a kind of giant story written specifically for you. And if the sky tells stories, then perhaps the animals do too. For hunter-gatherer peoples around the world, animals are rarely just meat. They are persons of a different kind. Teachers, tricksters, guardians, the bear that walks on two legs, the raven that stole the sun, the antelope that gave people fire. These stories are not just entertainment. They are moral lessons, ecological knowledge, maps of the landscape woven into memory. Your Paleolithic ancestors almost certainly saw the world this way. When they painted a running horse on a cave wall, they might not have been painting a horse. They could have been summoning a spirit that moves like a horse, thinks like a horse, sees the world from the height of a horse. To offend this spirit could mean a failed hunt for years to come. To honor it was to bring abundance. The result was a world where everything is filled with meaning. Stones, rivers, trees, animals, clouds, stars, all are beings. All have their own stories and intentions. And in this world, special people emerged. Those who saw vivid dreams, who noticed patterns invisible to others, who could calm a panicking child or soothe someone's pain with words and songs. They could become shamans, or whatever your ancestors called them. Imagine a night by the fire. The day's work is done. People sit in a loose circle, some mending nets, others dozing. The shaman, or storyteller, or singer, the one who walks between worlds begins. A drum sounds. Perhaps it is just stretched skin on a frame, or a hollow log beaten with a stick. The rhythm starts slowly, like a heartbeat, then accelerates. Voices soar. Feet begin to stomp. The group's breathing unconsciously synchronizes. After a while, you are no longer just listening to the rhythm, you are inside it. Music is one of the oldest human technologies we know. Flutes from bird wing bones. Hollowed out deer antlers that can be played like wind instruments. Simple percussion instruments that would leave no trace in the archaeological record, but are almost certainly as old as language itself. In the flickering light of the fire, rhythm and melody create something extraordinary. They dissolve the boundaries between individuals. When everyone moves in time, sings one phrase, claps to one beat, the group temporarily becomes a single organism. Fear recedes, time stretches. People enter states of shared trance, light or deep, without any drugs, through breath, sound, and movement alone. In these moments, stories about animal spirits, ancestors, and journeys to other worlds are not just tales. They feel real because you are experiencing something that is actually real. A different mode of consciousness. A different way of being, a mind in a body surrounded by other minds and bodies doing the same. This is the social function of early spirituality. It is needed not just to explain a thunderstorm or what happens after death. It is needed to fuse small, fragile groups of people into something strong enough to survive. Shared rituals, shared symbols, shared songs. This is the glue holding the group together when food is scarce and danger is near. And when you put it all together, the deep cave art, the beads and ochre, the carved figurines, the abstract science, the music, and the trance, you get a portrait of early humans that is very far from the caricature of crude cave dwellers. By day, they tracked animals, napped stone, dug roots, watched the weather. By night, they entered another world, a world where the dead could hear, where the sky could speak, where animals had secret names, and mountains remembered the past. They carried heavy spears and sharp tools, but they also carried invisible things, myths, songs, rules, taboos, dreams. And when the fire finally burned low and the last stories ended, when ochre-stained hands were wiped on hides, when the drums fell silent and people stretched out on beds of grass and skins, they fell asleep in a universe they had helped create, a universe of meaning, layered over the harsh facts of cold, hunger, and danger. While they slept, the painted herds waited in the dark tunnels underground. The beads rested on sleeping skin. The Venus figurine lay at someone's head, always tucked in a pouch with other small treasures. Above them, the stars slowly turned, whether anyone was watching them or not. By morning, the practical work of survival would begin again. But that inner life, the songs, symbols, the sense of hidden forces, moving all that exists, it never truly stopped. It is still with us. Only now, instead of torches on limestone, we use screens in the dark. Instead of ochre on skin, digital avatars and fashion brands. Instead of carved bone figurines, we have icons, logos, and characters that mean much more to us than their physical substance. The tools have changed. The firmware beneath them has not. In our Paleolithic camp, the night grows deeper. The last embers glow red. Someone stirs in their sleep. A child murmurs and falls silent, comforted. Outside, a distant wolf howls, and no one wakes. They have heard it thousands of times. Tomorrow there will be more walking, more gathering, perhaps another hunt. But now, in the silence between the crackling embers and the first light of dawn, the inner life of early humans rests, not disappeared, but simply waiting for the chance to rise again with the sun and the stories. And when this new day begins, we can follow them into the next part of their routine. By late evening, the light changes. Shadows begin to lengthen, colors wash out of the landscape, and the temperature drops faster than one might expect. For Paleolithic people, this is not just a beautiful sunset. It is a signal, a quiet alarm clock saying to everyone, whatever you need to do, finish it now. The open landscape, which seemed manageable in the daylight, becomes something else entirely in the dark. Depth perception collapses. Predators that spent the day hiding in the shadows begin to move. Therefore, your ancestors begin to narrow their world, pulling it inward, directing activity toward the very thing that has defined the evening for humans, for at least hundreds of thousands of years, toward the fire. Not everyone had it constantly. There were likely still groups that occasionally lost fire or went without it during treks. But for many late Paleolithic communities, fire was as essential to the evening as gravity is to your body right now. It is not just a tool. It is a boundary line. Inside is the circle of light and warmth. Us outside is everything else. As the sun sets, people flock back to camp, to this flickering center. Gatherers return with armfuls of wood, bundles of plants, and sometimes unexpected finds. Eggs, honey, shellfish. Hunters pull in later, sometimes triumphantly with meat, sometimes empty-handed and silent. Children, who spent the day in a whirlwind of play and experimentation, narrow their radius, drawn by the same invisible force. The noise level changes. Daytime work is a matter of scraping, chopping, and calling out to one another over distances. The evening is more restrained. You hear the crackle of wood, the soft thud of stone as the final flake is struck off, the muffled murmur of voices as people settle by the fire. However, before anyone truly rests, there is one more task, no less important than eating: preparing a place to sleep. Beds sound like a luxury, but they are actually a survival technology. The ground is cold. It is damp. It is full of insects, parasites, and heat-sapping stone. If you lie directly upon it night after night, your body will pay the price. Thus, your ancestors learned to build barriers between themselves and the earth. Archaeologists have found traces of ancient beds, compressed layers of grasses, leaves, and aromatic plants laid in thick mats that were sometimes renewed again and again in the same spot. Think of it as a primitive mattress. First, someone clears away the largest stones and debris. Then a foundation of dry material is laid. Grass, reeds, leaves, anything that traps air and wicks away water. On top are softer plants, perhaps moss. Then, if available, animal hides. Deer, antelope, or maybe even larger game. For side up for insulation. Skin side down for durability. This is not personal furniture. Sleeping arrangements follow a social map. Parents are near children. Elders are where they can most easily be helped and protected. People with strange relationships might not lie next to one another. Over time, everyone knows their place as night falls. These arrangements reveal status, alliances, and affections without a single word being spoken. And while this quiet construction of beds takes place at the edge of the camp, something more vibrant is happening at the center of the evening meal. If you imagine early humans constantly snacking throughout the day like grazing animals, the evidence does not support this. For many groups, the most substantial and reliable meal appears to have taken place at dusk. During the day, people might have snacked on a handful of berries here, cracked a bone for marrow there, or eaten a few nuts or roasted tubers on the go. But the full account of the day's successes, especially when it came to meat, was usually settled in the evening by the fire. Food is not just eaten, it is transformed. Meat is roasted or boiled in leather pouches or bark containers. Bones are cracked for the fat-rich marrow. Organs are cooked quickly before they spoil. Plant foods are ground, peeled, crushed, and have their toxins leached out. Someone tosses roots into the embers. Someone else turns spits of meat. A third person maintains the proper intensity of the fire, adding wood at just the right moment. This is not random chaos. It is a practiced choreography, and the distribution of this food is a social act. Who gets the first piece? Who gets the choice cuts? Does the lucky hunter keep most of the meat for himself? Or is it shared according to custom? First to the elders, then to the small children, then to everyone else. Different groups likely did this differently, but almost all of them understood one basic truth. In a forager society, You do not survive long if you are selfish during the big meal. Therefore, the evening becomes a lesson in generosity and memory. People notice who shares and who hoards, who ensures that a child at the far end of the fire gets a bit of liver or fat, and who pretends not to see. These actions are etched into memory. In a world without written laws, it is this behavior that builds your reputation and determines who will help you when it is your turn to be unlucky. While the hands are busy, so are the mouths. Human social life thickens in the conversations by the fire. During the day, communication is often practical and shouted across distances. Over here, watch out, try it this way. At night, the volume drops. The content changes. People discuss the day that has passed. A hunter quietly explains how the antelope bolted faster than expected. A gatherer laughs about how she tipped over an entire basket of berries. Someone brings up a minor conflict that happened earlier, a sharp word, a broken tool, and the group irons it out over food, because carrying that tension into tomorrow could be dangerous. Planning also takes place. When to move camp, who will go scouting toward that distant ridge, should they follow the reindeer herds north or stay by the river a while longer. These are not formal counsels, but certain patterns emerge. Some speak more, others listen and nod, influencing the course of the conversation with a single quiet remark. Children soak all of this in, learning not just facts about animals and plants, but how decisions are made, what is considered persuasive, when to speak, and when to be silent. And then come the stories. When stomachs are full and the sharp edge of hunger is gone, the tone changes again. Someone might begin with a familiar tale of how an ancestor killed a monstrous lion, or how the river rose so high it swept away half the camp. These stories are not mere entertainment. They are a storehouse of memory. In a world without writing, stories carry maps within them. In which valley do the bitter roots grow that can only be eaten after double boiling? In which rocky outcrop is the flint suitable for blades hidden? Where do dangerous spirits like to dwell? Or, in practical terms, where do sudden storms and flash floods occur? Layered around these facts are strata of myth, conjecture, and outright fiction. Did people embellish? Absolutely. But the exaggerations helped make critical information unforgettable. By that same firelight, another listener might add a story of a different kind, one that stretches not outward, but upward, because above them is the same sky you see now if you step away from city lights. A sky so full of stars it feels almost crowded, occasionally crossed by the ghostly band of the Milky Way, and pierced by the sudden streak of a meteor. We cannot know that first moment when a human looked up and asked, "What is that?" But it would be strange if no one did. Long before constellations received the names we recognize, people likely traced their shapes with their fingers, connecting stars into animals, ancestors, paths. Perhaps they decided that the bright star over there was the eye of a giant creature watching them, or that the Milky Way was the trail souls take after death, or that the phases of the moon marked the shifting moods of a powerful being, whose favor must be kept. None of this leaves fossil traces, but the human brain has not changed all that much. Give people time, a dark sky, and a need to explain a dangerous world, and they will invent stories. These stories will shape behavior. When to travel, when to plant in later eras, when to venture on a risky hunt. Slowly, night after night, a cosmic calendar could form in their minds, stitched together from glowing dots that no one could reach but everyone could see. But while eyes are turned upward and thoughts wander far, the body remains here, in a very real and risky place. Night in the Paleolithic world is not safe. Predators move beyond the circle of fire. Hyenas, lions, leopards, wolves. In some regions, they smell the meat, hear the voices, feel the warmth. On most nights, the fire itself and the concentrated presence of humans are enough of a deterrent. But not always. There are sites where human bones bear the unmistakable marks of carnivore teeth. Caves show alternating occupancy. Humans one season, big cats the next. Therefore, someone always sleeps with one ear open. Vigilance becomes a shared responsibility. Some are naturally light sleepers. Others take turns keeping watch, waking to add wood to the fire and listen for the wrong rustle in the grass. The camp is ranged to slow any approach. Thick brush is cleared, thorny branches are piled at key access points. Sleeping areas are grouped, so that, if one person bolts upright in fear, others can be awakened in seconds. And in many late Paleolithic camps, another pair of eyes and ears joins this watch. Dogs, or at least the animals that will soon become them. By around 40,000 years ago, the process of domestication was likely already underway in some places. Wolves that were slightly more tolerant of humans, slightly less skittish, slightly more inclined to linger at the edge of the camp scavenging for bones and scraps. Over generations, these slightly tamer wolves might become tolerated in return and even encouraged. They make noise when strangers approach. They scent predators before you do. They follow a trail. They can help in the hunt. At night, they justify their place again and again, curled at the edge of the firelight or even pressed against human bodies on the beds. They add warmth. Their thick fur is a living blanket, especially for children. Their ears twitch at faint sounds no human would notice. A growl, a raised head, a sudden bark. It is an early warning system plugged directly into your nervous system. Once you begin to rely on this, life without them starts to feel more dangerous. So you have this layered alertness. Humans sinking into sleep, a semi-awake adult stirring the embers. Not quite domesticated dogs shifting position and scenting the wind. Together, they create a margin of safety in a world that never fully sleeps. Gradually, the conversations die down. The fire turns from a bright flame into glowing coals. The sharp orange softens to a deep red. Someone places a final log, not for cooking now, but to keep the warmth until morning. Sparks fly up and vanish into the darkness, for a moment mimicking the stars above before winking out. People find their places on the beds. Children wedge themselves between adults, pressing their heads against warm shoulders. An elder pulls a hide up to the neck, tucking hands under a cheek. A hunter, tired and satisfied, stretches out on his side facing the fire, resting a hand carelessly on a dog that decided to sleep here tonight. The sounds of the night settle into layers. Closest is the crackle and sigh of the fire, the soft rhythm of breathing, the occasional murmur of one caught in a dream. A little further out is the scuttle of small animals, the distant cry of a nocturnal bird. Further still is the long, eerie howl of hyenas, the deep chest growl of a lion claiming territory. These distant threats are terrifying, but they are also familiar. Woven into the background of every childhood, people learn to distinguish danger by sound. The difference between a hunting growl and a frustrated one, between a curious rustle and an approaching pounce. Beneath all this, the sky continues to rotate. The stars slowly roll toward the horizon. The moon rises or sets according to its phase. Clouds pass by, sometimes obscuring the light, sometimes revealing more. Some members of your small group fall asleep quickly. Exhaustion overcomes anxiety. Others linger in this liminal space, neither fully awake nor fully gone into sleep. Thoughts wander between memories of the day and half-formed images floating from the fire and the stars. Perhaps they are reliving a dangerous moment of the hunt. Perhaps they are thinking of a child they lost last winter, imagining them among those distant lights. Or perhaps they are simply listening to the breathing of the people they love and, for a moment, feeling something akin to gratitude. Eventually, even the last sentinels withdraw into themselves. The fire settles into a bed of shimmering embers. The dogs rest their heads on their paws. For a few hours, this tiny island of humans becomes as vulnerable as it can possibly be. Eyes closed, weapons out of reach, minds in other worlds. And yet, in another sense, they have never been safer. They are enveloped in layers of protection they built themselves. The knowledge of where to make camp and where not to, the carefully maintained fire. The beds protecting them from the cold earth, the circle of kin who will wake if someone cries out. The warning growl of an animal that, for reasons not entirely clear even to itself, has chosen to live alongside them. This is where a day in the life ultimately leads, Not just to survival, not just to a constant struggle, but to a nightly return to a shared center, to warmth, to story, to the faint but persistent sense that, despite all the dangers, this small circle of light in the darkness is enough at least until morning comes again. Conclusion. What we can learn from our ancestors. So, what did early humans actually do all day? They worked. They walked miles to find roots and berries. They hauled meat to camp. They worked stone until their hands ached. They mended. They fed children. They tended the fire. They watched for teeth and claws glowing at the edge of the darkness. But that is not all they did. They also sat. They looked into the flames and did absolutely nothing. They watched clouds drift over the hills and strings of migrating animals pass along the horizon. They told stories so slowly that a single narrative could last several evenings. They played not just the children, but the adults too. Mock fights, small contests, teasing games with pebbles, sticks, and bones. They sang. They traced patterns on cave walls and on their own skin. They rested. Their life was difficult, but not in the way we often imagine. It was not a non-stop hustle from dawn to dusk, but a pulsation of effort and long periods of calm, quiet time. A few hours of intense work, followed by a long stay together, moving with the seasons, moving with the light. This balance is the part we tend to forget. After all, here we are with machines that grind and lift for us, with light that turns night into day, with information in our pockets that no hunter-gatherer could imagine. And yet, somehow, many of us find ourselves with less true leisure than they had, less unstructured time, fewer evenings when we just sit and observe the world without checking the clock. The irony is profound. We created tools to free our time, and then filled that time again with noise. Your Paleolithic ancestors never scrolled a feed. They never answered emails by firelight. When the sun went down, there were few options. Talk, listen, create, dream, or sleep. Their attention belonged to the people around them, the flames before them, the stars overhead. But if you strip away the technology, the basic things that were important then are important now. Community, a circle of people who know your stories, who will share their last piece of dried meat with you, who will stand beside you when the hyenas come too close. Today, this might be family, friends, an online community. The form has changed, but the need has not. Our nervous systems are still tuned for small groups around a shared task, a shared meal, a shared joke, creativity. The first carved bone pendant, the first handprint on stone, the first rhythm beaten out on a log. None of this helped catch more antelope, but it made life richer. It turned bare survival into a story worth telling. This impulse to create something unnecessary and beautiful is still one of the most human things about us. Nature. For almost the entirety of our history, we woke and slept with the light. We knew the seasons by heart. We could read the landscape the way we now read text. Even if you live in a city, part of your brain still settles when you hear the sound of rain outside the window, the wind in the trees, or waves hitting the shore. These sounds are older than language, older than Homo sapiens. Purpose. Early humans didn't have 5-year plans, but they had reasons to get up, feed the children, help the group, and keep the fire going for one more night. Meaning was woven into daily tasks. Our goals now may be more abstract, but beneath them always lies the same question: who am I doing this for, and why? When we look back at their days, at the walking, the contemplating, the talking, the work interrupted by laughter and silence, we see not a lost world that we can never touch. We see a template, a reminder that a good human day has a certain rhythm: effort and rest, noise and silence, togetherness and a little solitude. As you lie and listen, you are already doing something deeply ancient. You are letting the day end. You are stepping back from the hunt for emails and notifications back toward the fire. If you enjoyed this slow journey into the past, you can gently give a like, so the spirits of the algorithms know to show you more. You can leave a comment if you wish, perhaps tell us from which part of the world you are listening, what the landscape is outside the walls of your own camp. Today, desert, forest, city lights, or mountain air, it all becomes part of this extended circle. If you want to walk with us regularly through these quiet corners of history, you can subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And if you have the desire to support the channel more significantly, there is an option here on YouTube to become a sponsor. This helps us do more of these long, calm explorations. This is entirely optional. The fact that you are watching, listening, and resting with us is already more than enough. For now, you don't need to do anything at all. Just imagine. The fire in your ancestors' camp has burned down to deep, even coals. Most in the group are already asleep, curled under hides, breathing slow and steady. Someone tosses on a final piece of wood, more out of habit than necessity. Above them, above you, the same moon floats across the sky. The same constellations look down, shifted slightly with time, but still recognizable. 40,000 years ago, a child looked at these stars, fighting sleep for one more story. Someone reached out, stroked their hair, and promised that the hunt would wait until morning. Today, you share that same human need to stop, to be safe, to let the mind loosen the grip it holds on the past day. The hunt will wait until morning. The world will wait until morning. For now, you can rest under the same ancient sky,